record. Let me let somebody in. Okay, there we go. I think in the last class we ended on the Boston Tea Party, right? We talked a little bit about it, Boston Tea Party. So it is a protest set up by who? Who organized this protest in Boston?
Is it like Sons of Liberty?
Yes, exactly. The Sons of Liberty. Yes. So they organized this protest. About 150 men dressed as Indians boarded 3 separate English ships in the Boston Harbor and dump about 90,000 pounds of tea into the water. So ruins all the tea. It's a lot of money. I think in Johnny Germain, they actually give you a dollar amount for how much money that tea. I think he says like roughly $20,000, I think, if I remember correctly. It's been a minute since I've seen the movie, but I think that's what he says. That's a lot of money back then, like a lot of money. So, okay, so to punish the vandalism in Boston, and your book talks about this quite a lot, England passes something called the Coercive Acts. The Coercive Acts is what England calls them. The colonists call them the Intolerable Acts. So basically there's 5 separate parts to the Intolerable Acts, the Coercive Acts. And your book goes into quite a good description of all the different parts to it, but just in a nutshell, you have first they close the port of Boston, they shut down Boston. 2, they annul the Massachusetts Bay Colony Charter. They dissolve or restrict the political institutions in a lot of the colonies, actually, not just Boston. And they allow British to continue to quarter troops in people's homes. And remember, we talked about that there were now there's roughly about 5,000 British troops in Boston after the Boston Tea Party, and the population of Boston still only about 15,000 people. So it's a lot of troops in Boston at this time. And there's mixed reviews about the Boston Tea Party, right? There are a lot of colonists who feel like, yes, definitely, it had to be done. England pushed us so far that we needed to do something drastic. And there are some colonists who believe that it's too much. They've crossed a bridge. It's gone too far. We need to show the British that the colonists are law-abiding citizens, that we're not rebels, we're not in revolution, that we just don't want troops quartered here, and we would like a couple of the things that they have been fighting for, right? Which are specifically what? There's 2 main things that they're pushing for here that England has denied them so far. One is what? What did we say? What are the 2 things that they're pushing for? I feel like that meme, there's a meme for teachers. It's just a skeleton sitting like this. And it says, I'll wait here until you answer me. And it's just a skeleton sitting like this. I kind of feel like that meme right now. Anybody? Bueller? Oh my goodness, you guys. I know it's early, but come on. Okay. 1, no taxation without representation. And then 2, trial by a jury of peers, right? Those are the 2 big things that they're fighting for. They feel like they are due because they are British citizens. All British citizens should have those rights, right? Yes, we talked about this, right? Yes? Oh my goodness. Okay, all right. Moving on Okay, in response to the Intolerable Acts, the colonies convene a meeting. So they call for a meeting in Philadelphia in 1774. Why would they meet in Philadelphia? Does anybody know why they chose Philadelphia to meet? Anybody have any idea? So Philadelphia is actually our first ever capital of the colonies. It's our first ever capital city. And when we first become the United States of America, after the Declaration of Independence, Philadelphia is our first capital. So they hold the first ever meeting in the colonial meeting to discuss what to do about the Intolerable Acts. They hold it in Philly in 1774. All of the colonies send representatives except one. There's one colony that doesn't participate. Can anybody take a guess on which one? It's a wild guess. You might know.
Georgia.
I'm sorry?
Georgia.
Georgia, exactly. Georgia doesn't send a representative. So 12 of the 13 colonies get together and they meet. And it's a lot of famous names at this meeting. A lot of our famous founding fathers take part in this. You've got Patrick Henry, John Adams, George Washington is there, Ben Franklin, all those guys. They're all there in Philadelphia to discuss what to do. They all agree. The first thing that they must do is denounce the Intolerable Acts. It's the first thing that they agree on. Every town, every city, every county creates a committee to continue to enforce the boycott of all British goods that are coming in. They don't want to give them any money. So they were continuing the boycott of all imported British goods. A lot of people are hoping that this is going to provide a peaceful solution, that this is not leading to war. But then there are also a lot of colonists who are preparing, who are getting ready for war. I think your book talks about, what does it call it? It calls it something, the powder something. Shoot, now I can't remember what it's called. I didn't know about this. The powder alarm. Shows colonial settlers, they're supposed to take up arms against the British government. So they start stockpiling guns and gunpowder, and they start forming militias. You guys know what a militia is? Those are still a thing. Those are still around. We still have militias in this country. Does anybody know what a militia is? Has nobody played Assassin's Creed? Do you not know what a militia is? Okay. I think everybody's asleep, it seems like. I'm sorry. I know it's early. Okay. A militia is a group of people who come together. They're volunteers to protect or defend an area. So sort of like the military, but not the military. They're not associated with the military in any way. They're just a group of volunteers who agree to come together and protect and defend a specific area. Before we are the United States of America, and before we have an actual army in the country, this is what we have. We have a collection of militias. Each colony, each area of the colony, all of them have their own militia groups. And so basically that's what we are. We are a collection of militias at the beginning of the Revolutionary War. So people are getting prepared. Okay. In March of 1774, Patrick Henry gives a really famous speech to the Virginia legislature. And I know this, if you know anything about Patrick Henry, this is probably the thing that you know. He is getting the Virginia colony essentially ready for what he thinks is inevitable conflict. So he lists all of the acts passed by the British to get the colonists to pay their share and make money from the colonies. So he lists all the things that Britain has done. And basically he gives this really impassioned speech about how the colonists need to defend their rights. And he ends his speech by saying, and he actually climbs up on a desk to say it because he's all riled up about it. He climbs up on his chair and he yells, "Give me liberty or give me death." So he's got the Virginia colonists kind of riled up for what he believes is inevitable conflict with England. And it leads to them preparing. So the militia groups start getting more prepared for what they now feel like is an inevitable conflict. Okay. So in 1775, George Mason calls for militias to get ready. This is a quote: "A well-regulated militia composed of gentlemen, freeholders, and other free men is the strength and only stable security of a free government." Okay. Does that sound like anything that you know? Does that sound like anything that you've heard before? Do you recognize that at all? Anybody? Seriously? Does that ring a bell? Okay. Has anybody ever read the Second Amendment? Second Amendment's a huge political point, especially in the past few years. It has become a huge political issue. I mean, it's always has been, but that's more or less the beginning of the wording of the Second Amendment there, a well-regulated militia.
Yeah, honestly, I haven't, but I probably should.
So the Second Amendment, it says you have the right to bear arms, right? You have the right to bear arms. But it gives provisions for those rights. And one of them is a well-regulated militia. So right at the beginning of America, we knew how important a militia was. So, okay. The British also understand the importance of militias. They know what that means. So their first priority is to try to disarm militias. They start in Massachusetts because it has sort of become the hotbed of resistance, right? The Boston Tea Party, the Sons of Liberty, it is sort of the focal point where they start. They send troops to Concord in Massachusetts in 1775 to seize gunpowder and other military supplies. Paul Revere, right? We talked just a tiny bit about Paul Revere. He is a silversmith, right? And a member of the Sons of Liberty. He is supposed to, and you will see this in Johnny Tremaine. If you haven't watched the movie yet, this is in there too. He's supposed to ride from Boston to Lexington and Concord to let them know that the British troops were coming. They don't know if they're coming in by the sea, if they're coming in by port, or if they're coming overland, if they're marching in. And so the militias need to know how to prepare, right? And so it's Paul Revere's job to let them know, let the militias know how the British are coming in. And this is the famous, Paul Revere's ride, where he yells out, "The British are coming, the British are coming." That doesn't actually happen. First and foremost, why would he not say the British are coming? You know why he would not say the British are coming?
Aren't they British colonists?
Yes, exactly. They're all British. It would just be like, hey, we're coming. It just doesn't make sense. Historians think more accurately, he rode and let people know the regulars were coming. That's what they called them, the regulars. I don't know. Okay. So the thing is, Paul Revere is captured on this ride, on his infamous ride. He gets captured, and somebody else finishes his ride for him. Actually, a couple other people finished his ride. One is another member of the Sons of Liberty. His name is Dr. Samuel Prescott. He agrees to carry on, that the troops are on their way from Boston. And he rides for a bit. His daughter, actually, Prescott's daughter actually rides for a bit. She continues the ride for a little bit. So it's not just Paul Revere. He starts, but he doesn't finish. The thing is, was it Wordsworth? Longfellow? It's Longfellow. Writes a poem about Paul Revere later on. And it's the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. And I'm sure you've heard this, right? Gather near, let me tell you about the ride of Paul Revere, Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. Anyway, but in that, he basically describes how Paul Revere was incredibly brave, and he let everybody know, and he yells out that the British are coming, so that we, why do we do that? Why do we pick people and write these poems and stories about them all throughout American history? Even if it's not true, why did he do that? What do you think?
Patriotism.
Yeah, I think so. Just to give people somebody to, look up to, admire. It's brave what he did, to let everybody know that the British were on their way, that the regulars were coming. Excuse me. So anyway, okay. So do you know how they arrive? It's 1 if by land and 2 if by sea. He's supposed to hang a lantern in the North Church, in the window of the North Church. 1 lantern if they're coming by land, 2 lanterns if they're coming by sea. Do you know? Do you remember?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. But I mean, you wouldn't have to yell the British is coming if you're doing that,
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So he hangs the lantern. It is 2 that come by sea, and they land and they march into Boston. They're heading from Boston to Lexington and Concord. Lexington and Concord are technically 2 separate towns, but they're literally right on top of each other. So it would be like Murfreesboro and Smyrna. So they're like right next to each other. So the British are going to, the British soldiers are going to Lexington. At this point, there are about 700 of them. 700 British soldiers arrive, and waiting for them in Lexington is about 60 or 70 militiamen. So the colonists are vastly outnumbered at Lexington. They have a skirmish. It's not a real fight technically, at Lexington and Concord. So the deal is, nobody knows who fires the first shot, right? Somebody shoots. Somebody fires a gun at Lexington and Concord, and nobody knows who, but it becomes known as a shot heard round the world, because this is technically the first ever battle of the American Revolution. This is what we count as the first battle of the American Revolution, at Lexington. And obviously the British win, and the militia retreat out of Lexington and move to Concord. They scoot over to Concord. When they get to Concord, the British are faced with a bigger group of militiamen and a better organized group of militiamen at the North Bridge. At that point, when the British get there, they are forced to retreat. There is a group of Royal Marines that show up at Concord, and they are forced to retreat by this gang of militiamen. Hold on, somebody's coming in. Okay, by a group of militiamen. This group of Royal Marines that retreats, they go to Williamsburg and destroy the gunpowder and the guns and anything else that they can get their hands on that they feel like would help the militias. Patrick Henry finds out, and he plans a march on Williamsburg. So Williamsburg at the time is the capital of Virginia. and where they have an armory. So it made sense to go there to try to destroy their stuff. Okay. At this point, the American Revolution has technically begun. Technically, historians count this as the beginning of the American Revolution. The thing is, it's just one battle, and it's just happened, and not all the colonists know about it. You know what I mean? It's not like they have internet. They can't text each other. So news has to spread, basically, that this is happening. There is a British royal governor named Lord Dunmore. Lord Dunmore. He is a British royal governor there with the British troops. And he says that if the militia comes into Williamsburg, remember they're in Williamsburg. So he says, if the militia comes into Williamsburg, he will make a declaration saying that all of the slaves in the colony of Virginia are free. He will grant their freedom. To overthrow the rebels and reduce the town to ashes. That's his saying, okay? This shocks the colonists a little bit because they feel like that's a low blow, that they would be using their slaves against them, basically. So Dunmore is there and he's waiting. They're waiting for a reply from the colonists to see what they're planning to do. Because remember, Patrick Henry is ready to go and attack Williamsburg. 2 weeks later, he issues what comes to be known as Lord Dunmore's proclamation. So Lord Dunmore offers freedom to any slave who leaves and joins the British Army, the British forces, in helping put down the American Revolution. So just a question for you, just a personal opinion question here. If you were a slave in Virginia, what would you do? Would you leave? Would you join the British? Would you stay put? Would you not want to get involved? What would you do? Just curious.
I would join.
Would you join?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think it would probably just determine it's based on however, I mean, it's terrible to think, but whoever owned me and like what I was like, if it was like really bad and I wanted to get back at the people that were owning me, I might talk with the British.
Right.
I mean, I can see it going either way, essentially.
Okay. All right. It sort of reminds me a little bit of have you ever seen Django Unchained? I love Tarantino.
Yeah.
I love
Yes.
Tarantino.
Maybe.
So it reminds me just a little bit about when Christoph Waltz tells him that he wants him to help him be a bounty hunter. And he's like, "You're going to pay me to shoot white people?" Okay.
Yeah.
Do that,
Yeah.
right? I'll do that.
Well, you could also see like at the end of that movie too, you know, it was like, honestly, the main conflict was between two, previous slaves, or one of, a former slave and a slave.
And a slave, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Who's basically turned into what Uncle Tom, essentially, is what he becomes basically at the end. Yeah, I don't know what I would have done. Obviously, it would have depended on each person's situation. I don't know what I would have done. But here's the numbers. Within a month of the issuing of Lord Dunmore's proclamation, 300 slaves have left and joined the British Army, Navy, Army soldiers. So Lord Dunmore establishes what he calls his Ethiopian regiment. That's what he calls his group of slaves. He calls them his Ethiopian regiment. Within 6 months, there's 800 of them. And eventually, at the peak, there's 1,100 of them. So over 1,000 slaves leave and join the British. They get housing. I mean, not great housing, but probably better than what they have been accustomed to. So they get housing, they get a uniform. At first they don't get shoes, but at some point they do. They get shoes eventually, which is, I know that sounds like not much, but for them it was big. They get, uniforms with a big sash across the front that says, it's got a motto across the front, and it says "Liberty to Slaves" across the front of their uniforms. So he turns them into, they get weapons, obviously, which they have not been able to have for a while now. So the Virginians complained that the British are sinking to a new low here. They're using their slaves against them. There is a group of people, though, mostly religious groups, Quakers for the most part, who feel like this is great. This is a fantastic idea because they draw parallels between the slaves are wanting their freedom, just like colonists are wanting freedom from the British. The slaves are wanting freedom from their masters. So they sort of draw parallels there, that they understand what the slaves are doing, why they would leave and why they would join the British, because they just want the same thing that everybody else does: freedom, opportunity. So they argue, there's an argument there for both sides in the colonies. Okay, so Lord Dunmore's proclamation. Okay, let's do, okay, so we're almost at the end of this chapter. This is really about the end. Let's get to the Declaration of Independence. Okay, so the next big battle, there are several battles along the way. The next big battle is at Bunker Hill, June 17th, 1775. A couple months, about 2 months after Lexington and Concord, there's another fight in Charlestown, yeah, across the Charles River from Boston, so pretty close. The Americans dig in at Bunker Hill. It's also called Breed's Hill, Bunker Hill, basically the same. They are preparing to hold off the British in Boston after learning that they were coming through Boston. So most of the fighting takes place at Breed's Hill. It is a British victory at the end. However, the British sustain really heavy losses at the Battle of Bunker Hill. 800 wounded, 226 killed. Most of the 226 people who are killed are officers, so that's a big deal. The colonists are able to retreat and regroup, and they suffered relatively fewer losses. The big thing about Breed's Hill and Bunker's Hill is that it is a good indication, and it shows the British that the colonists are not just a group of rabble-rousers. They're not just a collection of yokels with pitchforks who are trying to overthrow the British government. It basically shows the British that they are willing and that they are able to fight against a well-trained army. At this time in history, the British Navy is the strongest. The British Army is the biggest and strongest in the world. So there's a famous saying, the sun never set on the British Empire. The British Empire was huge and incredibly powerful at this point. They owned a lot of territory, they owned a lot of colonies, a lot of land. They had a huge navy and a huge army. So that the British would that the colonists are even able to put up a fight against this huge, well-trained army and navy is a little bit ridiculous. The British are really by this. So, okay, so the Battle of Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill basically says to the British, gives them an indication that, oh, crud, okay, they're going to do this. They're willing and they're able and they're going to fight. This is going to be not just a, we come in here and put this down and it's over in a couple months sort of situation. This is happening. This is really about to happen. Okay, so the colonists hold another meeting. They get together. They're still holding out hope. They have a Continental Congress meeting. They're still holding out hope that there could be some sort of peaceful resolution pretty quickly. They reach out to King George III. They send him, in July of 1775, they send him something called, I'm so sorry, hang on. What is that noise? That's super loud. Okay, sorry. They send out something called the Olive Branch Petition, asking King George III to intervene. Yeah, asking him to intervene. This doesn't have to be a big, long, bloody war. If you just meet with us, if you just hear our demands, hear our, our grievances, then I think maybe we could come to some sort of peaceful understanding about this. King George III basically says no. Without really reading the Olive Branch Petition, he says no. This is a definite no. I don't care what they want. They're an open rebellion against the British government, and that cannot stand. This is no, nothing like that is happening here. So it pushed those at the convention who wanted independence to now push even harder. The time for reconciliation has now passed. It leads them to the decision collectively that it is time to fight for independence from Great Britain, from England. You have two choices here. You can remain loyal to England or you can rebel. Those are your two options. So we have two groups of people here. We have patriots and we have loyalists. That's what we term these groups of people. One, patriots are those who want to fight, for independence. And then you have loyalists, those who want to remain loyal, right, to the British government. At the beginning of the American Revolution, we've got roughly a third of the colonists who are considered patriots. And then we have roughly a third who are considered loyalists. And then the other third are undecided. They really don't know yet. They have no strong opinion one way or the other. That is going to change pretty quickly, but right at the beginning, it's pretty evenly divided among those groups of people. So, okay. Your book doesn't talk about it in this chapter. In the next chapter, we'll talk a little more about Thomas Paine and the push for independence. But Thomas Paine plays a really important role in the push for independence, for the push to fight for this. Fighting from independence from the British government. So this leads to Declaration of Independence. Did y'all read the Declaration of Independence? Have you read it? It's not really that long. Look, it's like, I printed, it's like a page and a half. It's really not that much. But if you go through the Declaration of Independence, I mean, the opening is quite famous, right? It's quite famous. It's not the, I think a lot of people get it confused with the Constitution. It's not the We the People, it's the other one. But okay, ready? When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. Okay, so that's the beginning of the Declaration of Independence. And this is probably the famous part. Ready? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There you go. That is basically what the Declaration of Independence says. We are declaring, it's pretty obvious here, we're declaring independence from England, right? I like to equate the Declaration of Independence to basically a breakup letter with England. To me, that's essentially what it is. The opening paragraphs basically say, we have come to a point in this relationship where we can no longer move forward together. It's been real. However, this needs to come to an end. And then the rest of the Declaration of Independence, I mean, literally, I'll show you here. The rest of the Declaration of Independence. So here's the first two paragraphs. And then from here all the way down, and then all the way down to here. So more than half of the Declaration of Independence are a list of reasons why this relationship is no longer working, basically. You didn't do this. You haven't done this. You're not planning on ever doing this, is basically what it is. I know y'all don't know much about breakup letters. Y'all don't do that anymore. That's something that us old people used to do, like back in high school, breakup letters. But now you just text each other, right? I'm out. Bye. Been real. See ya. I don't know, whatever. But yeah, so essentially that's what this is, though. It is a very long, very detailed letter telling England, these are the reasons we can no longer continue to be a part of the British Empire. We can no longer be your colony. We need a government of our own, basically. Okay. In the end, it says, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America. And so this is the first time we actually get called the United States of America. That's new. The representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world, for the vicissitude of our intentions, do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare, here it is, that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. And they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown. All political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. That as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, God, right? We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. That's the end. Okay, and then they sign it, right? And then they all sign it. A lot of loyalists don't agree with Britain, but they don't favor going to war either. Loyalist cause appeals to a very specific group of people in the new colonies, in the new United States of America. There are two groups of people specifically that are loyalists. One, Quakers. Why Quakers? Why don't they want to join in the American Revolution?
Because they're
Pacifists.
Exactly. They're pacifist.
Sorry if I interrupted.
Yes. Oh, no, you're good. They don't want to fight, period. Period. They sort of step back from all of this, which at the time technically makes them loyalists. They don't favor remaining part of the British Empire, but they just don't want to fight, period. The other group are really wealthy Americans, really wealthy colonists who want to keep their land, their money, their businesses. I want to keep it going just like it's been going because it's working out pretty well for those people. So there's a large percentage of people who, really wealthy people who are remaining loyalists. Okay. Okay, so people are really excited about the Declaration of Independence, a lot of them, patriots. They topple a statue of King George III and they melt it down and turn it into roughly 42,000 bullets that they then use in the American Revolution, just to let him know what they think about it, okay? Washington orders the Declaration read to every unit in the Continental Army before a battle, just to let them know what they're fighting for and what's going on here. Ben Franklin famously says, well, gentlemen, we must now hang together or we shall most assuredly hang separately, right? This is it. We're either in it together or this is going to fall apart. We have to stay together in this. Okay. That is pretty much it. That is basically where your chapter ends. We'll talk more specifics about the actual war and the actual fighting of the American Revolution after your midterm. But that is basically it all the way up to, all the way up to the end of chapter 7. So, okay. Does anybody have any questions? Do you have any comments, concerns, anything? Please don't forget your quiz and don't forget your discussion post for this week. Don't forget to watch Johnny Tremaine. It's important that you watch Johnny Tremaine because it's your midterm question, right? Okay. And then I will check the date for your midterm. I will check that and let you know as soon as I figure something out. And I'm gonna try to do that at the end of class, okay? So I'll post that in the news section at the end of class, okay? All right, does anybody have any questions before we go? Everybody good?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, fantastic. I'll be available on Friday if you need me. Don't forget SI sessions. Have a good rest of your day,
You too.
guys.